Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the First Lady of Florida, Casey DeSantis.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I got to tell you, I am so humbled and honored to be your First Lady. I've been able to do things that have made me very humbled and honored, and it's been a privilege since the very beginning. And I also want to say, as I've seen so many wonderful faces, so many familiar faces, thank you for the prayers. Thank you for sending me cards when I was going through my health battle. It meant the world to me. And I can tell you this, I would not be standing here right now if it weren't for those prayers. So God bless you and thank you for what you did. You know, I see so many great Republicans from across the state. I see so many wonderful, familiar faces. You know, I even see that we let some Democrats in here. I mean, the media, they're here. You know, it's funny, these hits from the media, some of them are so funny, they're just laughable. So I had a friend the other day, she called me and she was like, Casey, and this was a little while ago, she's like, Casey, they're hitting you. And I said, they're hitting me? Like, what did I do? You know, I'm just standing up for parents' rights, the innocence of our children, you know, those sorts of things. Like, they're hitting me? And she goes, yes. Do you know what they're calling you? And I said, no, what are they calling me? They said, Walmart Melania. I said, to which I was like, awesome! Like, that's the greatest thing you could call me. For me to be in the same sentence of Melania is a wonderful thing. She's gorgeous. That's great. I love it. Score. And then also, yes, guilty as charged. I shop at Walmart. I have a 6'5" and a 3-year-old. Do you know how quickly they go out of these clothes? I need $2 t-shirts, and especially with Bidenflation and Bidenomics, everything is getting more expensive. And, you know, I have to say, speaking of Joe Biden, how nice would it be, by the way, to have a president of the United States, to have their kids bring home homework to the White House instead of cocaine, okay? You know, don't tell me that you don't know where the cocaine came from. I've been talking to a lot of law enforcement and people in the know, and they're like, oh yeah, we could figure that in 2 seconds. We know where the cocaine was coming from. You know, all jokes aside, I mean, how good does it feel to be in the free state of Florida? You know, it's not by coincidence or happenstance that this once swing state that was really determined by hanging chads is now bright red. So you look at the voter registration, and now we outpace the Democrats by 650,000 voter margin. And you go back to when the governor was first elected in 2018, there were Democrats, they had an advantage over us by 300,000 votes. They outpaced us, and we were able to turn it around and add 350,000 voters. And that happens for one reason, because we have one hell of a governor. You see, you remember it was DeSantis on his first day in office who removed the supervisor of elections in Palm Beach and Broward County when they couldn't get their acts together. It was DeSantis who appointed 7 conservative justices to the state Supreme Court. It was DeSantis who presided over elections that actually tabulated the winner by election night. What a concept. And when hurricanes hit our state, it was DeSantis who built bridges in 3 days, got people in their homes, and restored power in record time. It was DeSantis when the federal government left Americans stranded in Israel. It was the governor who muscled the resources and brought those Americans home. And it was DeSantis, not Joe Biden, who sent troops to our southern border. It was DeSantis. It was DeSantis who fought Disney when they tried to overturn parents' rights in this state. It was DeSantis who stared down the NCAA when they were trying to boycott the state over the governor's support of women competing in women's sports. I don't know if you remember this, but it was our governor, it was Ron DeSantis, who stood up for our Special Olympians, ensured that they could compete without being forced to take an experimental mRNA COVID vaccine. There are no vaccine mandates in the state of Florida. Never have been, never will be. It's DeSantis who had the backs of our men and women of law enforcement, leading to a 50-year crime low in the state of Florida. It was DeSantis, if you remember, during the riots of 2020, who said to the protesters, if you loot, if you destroy property, you are going to jail. It was DeSantis who ensured that DEI, CRT, CBDC, ESG, they are DOA in Florida. It's DeSantis who has stood strong for our Second Amendment rights. It is DeSantis who has led the charge to enact the death penalty for child rapists and pedophiles. It is DeSantis who stands up to protect the innocence of life. It is DeSantis who fought the teachers' unions, stood up for our kids, protected our parents, and fought for good teachers to get historic pay raises. And by the way, it is DeSantis who balanced the budget, vetoed $6 billion in spending, had a $21 billion surplus, and who enacted more than $2 billion in tax cuts. And it was DeSantis who won in a historic landslide never before seen in a governor's race in the state of Florida, winning by 1.5 million votes, a 20-point margin. And when you look at it, he won nearly 30% of independents, 20%, 10% of women, 30% of Hispanics, and 20% of independents. But I'll tell you what else. I'll tell you what else is really important. It was DeSantis who held the line for this state and this nation when the country went mad during COVID. He kept the state open and he kept the state free. And here's the deal about COVID, and I think that this is really important, and I haven't had a chance really to talk too much about this. Yes, it is important that he fought and he kept our kids in school, he kept businesses open, he kept churches open, he prohibited mandates, he fortified our inherent rights. Those were and are the right policy prescriptions. But it's 100% about leadership. It's about being a leader when you are being hit from all sides. And I think it's important to remember in the midst of all of the chaos during COVID that the world descended upon the state of Florida. And they were going after the governor, and they still are going after him. The media was coming after him. The left was coming after him. The federal government, Republicans in Washington, D.C. were coming after him. The bureaucracy was coming after him. And day after day, in the midst of that storm, in the midst of that chaos, and the relentless attacks, trying to get him to back down, to shut the state, to shutter our kids out of school, to force mandates, to adhere to their demands, to bend the knee to the elites, I watched people go on television, I watched people say some of the worst things that you can imagine about a really good man. I saw them demean and laugh and do terrible things. Heck, I had supporters calling me in the height of that chaos, and they were saying, Casey, you got to tell the governor he needs to shut down the state, he needs to force vaccine mandates, he needs to force mask mandates, he needs to do all of this stuff because his, quote, political career will be over unless he does all of these things. You have to look at the polls, they'll never recover as a result of this. And I would watch him day after day after day. He would get up, he would go downstairs, he would get a cup of coffee, he would grab his notebook, he would arm himself with the data and the evidence coming out of places like the United Kingdom and Spain and Sweden. He would talk to people who were being silenced on Twitter, Dr. Bhattacharya and Gupta and Kaldorf. I would watch himself daily, arm himself with the truth, the data, the evidence, the courage, and the strength of his convictions. I would watch him daily, solid as a rock, get up, walk out the door, walk in front of the cameras, and fight. He fought for you, fought for me, fought the left, fought the elites. He fought Fauci. He fought the federal government. He fought the bureaucracies. And he fought to defend our way of life, our God-given rights. He fought for our families. He fought for our children. And day after day, I watched as he oftentimes stood alone in the arena. No matter the hit, no matter how hard they came after him, no matter what they said, he would not back down, not an inch. He ignored all of the chaos, he dismissed all of the noise, and he focused on true north. He defended our liberties, our rights, our livelihoods, our happiness, and our families. And you see, I see so many people go into elected office and they're really afraid to make the tough decisions. They either don't want to or are afraid to do it. They'd rather wait for a poll to come out or a consultant to tell them which position to take because it would be more politically advantageous for them in the time, and that would lead to a longer career for them in politics. And they would just try to take the easy way out because leadership is hard. Too many politicians want to subcontract their leadership to the bureaucracies because it's easier to point the finger to say, you know what, that guy over there, he told me that, you can't go to school or you can't put food on the table for your family. It's not me. We should hold that guy accountable. No, it's up to the person who has been elected to represent the people. That's where the buck stops. That takes courage. That takes a spine of steel. And I can tell you this, no matter the battle, no matter the fight, our governor put himself in front of an oncoming freight train to defend the people of this state. He's done it his entire time in office. He's done it every day. He will continue to do it every day of the week and twice on Sunday while he is still governor. He is a leader, one with integrity, courage, strength, morals, discipline, and a heck of a lot of fight. And you don't have to guess the next time a crisis comes our way how Ron DeSantis will respond. And it's not a matter of when one comes or if one comes, it is a matter of when. It's inevitable. Because this is our time for choosing, as Reagan would say. We are not one generation away from losing America. We are one election. We don't have the luxury of sitting this one out and hoping that things get better because, in my opinion, if the Democrats get control, they will fundamentally transform this country. They'll pack the Supreme Court, nationalize elections, abolish the Electoral College. They will enact the central bank digital currency, and they're just getting warmed up. But there is hope because of the shining light that is Florida and our governor's leadership. He has proven that you can fight. He has proven that you can fight the big fights and you can win big elections if you have the backbone, if you arm yourself with the facts, the truth, and you have faith, and if you have the will and the courage to fight when it counts. It can be done. We will save this country. And you have got one hell of a fighter at the helm. And as you all know, he just doesn't fight. He fights and he wins big. And with that, it is my honor and it is my privilege to announce to you and welcome onto the stage America's governor and the next president of the United States, Ron DeSantis.
Down in sweet Florida, our governor is red, white, and blue. Oh, down in sweet Florida. Thank you. He's shooting us straight.
Thank you for coming. Wait a minute. Can we get rid of these teleprompters? We have a president. We don't even know who the president is who's ever loading the teleprompter. No, I don't think we need that in Florida. Let's get those done. You got to speak from the heart. It's not about reading off a teleprompter. We are the freest state in all of these United States, the free state of Florida. We have set the standard on so many things that when things go wrong in other states and other cities around this country, the first place people think to escape for refuge is right here in the Sunshine State. And that's because we've led and we've delivered results. And we just seen, even within the last month, when Hamas executed a brutal attack on our friends in Israel, I knew instinctively that this would impact the state of Florida. We just have too much relationships. We have Israeli Americans. We have people go over with their church groups. I knew that there was going to be implications for this state. Well, a couple days go by, come to find out, Biden had abandoned these American citizens who were trying to escape the war zone. The embassy wasn't helping. The State Department wasn't helping. So I said, okay, there's a void. Florida will stand up and lead. So we did an executive order. We scrambled our resources, and we were able to rescue over 700 Americans and bring them back, mostly from the state of Florida, but not exclusively. I think what people have seen, because if you and my wife, look, we have the greatest first lady in all 50 states. That I know for sure. But you think of what's happened, and I don't think that there's a parallel anywhere in the modern history of the Republican Party than what's happened in the state of Florida over these last 5 years. Casey pointed out, 2018, people said this was going to be a blue state. You had almost 300,000 more registered Democrats than Republicans. And people were saying that Florida was going to be lost. Well, we did something about that. We obviously got in. We had decisions to make. We led very boldly, didn't trim our sails. We leaned in on issues. We were aggressive. We were able to deliver results. And by the time that we stood for re-election in November of 2022, we weren't 300,000 registrations behind the Democrats. We were 300,000 registrations above the Democrats, which had never happened in the history of the state of Florida. And what's even better than that, and that helped us be able to win a record election for a Republican in the state of Florida, a governor's race, but what's even better is just since the November election, when we were 300,000 ahead, we're now 650,000 registrations over the Democrat. How does that happen? How does that happen? And I stand here as someone, we raise millions of dollars for voter reg and all that stuff. People have volunteered. And I'm not saying that's not important. It is. But there's no way a voter registration program can go from negative 300,000 to positive 650 in 5 years. The only way that can happen is if people organically are choosing to affiliate with this party in numbers that we've not seen before. Part of that is people moving to Florida because they were escaping lockdowns, they were escaping high taxes, they're escaping high crime. Do we have people here who escaped over the last 5 years and have moved to Florida? Yeah, you see them all the time, all the time. But we also have people that have been Democrats or independents, and they're flipping over to be registered Republicans. And that's why you can take a county like Miami-Dade, which, we lost at the presidential level 2016 by 30 points, to not only win Miami-Dade, but win it by double digits. Who thought that was possible? And yet we got that done. And the reason why that's happening is because people associate what we do here as Republicans in Florida with success, with freedom, with leadership, and this is something that they want to be a part of. And that is not happening in most other states throughout this country. You look at some of these states, we've blown winnable elections year after year. Over the last 3 election cycles, the brand of Republicans has become toxic, very difficult to attract people to the party. So Florida has shown the way forward for the Republican Party. We show how it can be done. to not only do good policy, but to do very good politically. So what is our model? How have we been able to do this? And I think it's very simple. In Florida, we fight for you. In Florida, we win for us. And in Florida, we lead this state to a better future. That's what we've pledged, and that's what we've delivered. And what's missing too often in the Republican Party, but also just across the country, is people want to see that you're willing to fight for them. It's very easy to do the right thing when the wind's at your back. The question is, when the media's after you, the left, when they're taking shots at you, are you going to be willing to dig in and do what's right, even in the face of opposition? Because if you're not willing to do it then the leadership and all the stuff we need is not there. A fighter is there when it's difficult. A fighter may be your lone voice on issues that matter to you, and we saw that here in the state of Florida when we had to deal with COVID. The amount of, and look, I'm fine, I'm a big boy, but the amount of grief that we took during COVID, and you go back now and look at it, and it's almost laughable because they were wrong and we were right, but not a lot of people thought that at the time. But we had to make a decision. Are you going to follow the crowd, or are you going to look at the data in front of you, realize what the people in Washington are selling us, wasn't doing the job, and chart your own course? And every time we charted our own course, we faced blowback. We faced a lot of opposition, and not just media, not just left, bureaucrats, and even some Republicans. But we dug in. We said in Florida, every single Floridian has a right to work and operate their businesses. And we're not going to let local governments stop that. We're not going to let the federal government stop that. We also said, when it wasn't popular, every single child in this state has a right to go to school and learn in person. Teacher unions didn't like that. The media didn't like that. The teachers union sued me summer of 2020, and they wanted to get the schools closed. We forced to be open. And then we stood up, first state of anybody in the country, to say, nobody in the state of Florida, whether you work for the state of Florida, whether you work for a local agency, or whether you work for a private corporation, nobody should be forced to choose between a job they need and a shot they do not want. So we had to make a very simple decision in the face of that opposition. How are we going to do? How are we going to stand? How are we going to choose here in the state of Florida? And I'm proud to say that we chose freedom over Fauciism, and this state is better off as a result of doing that. We've also had to dig in and fight for people when it comes to what's going on in our schools. And that means standing up and fight for the rights of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their kids, to ensure that we fight against toxic ideologies like critical race theory and get that out of our K through 12 schools, which we did. It also means we stand up, and look, you saw Mace come out, 5 years old. We got a 6-year-old and 3-year-old daughters at home. So my wife and I are very sensitive to what's going on, not just in schools, but in society with respect to raising kids. We just believe that you should be able to have your kids go to school, watch cartoons, just be kids without having some agenda shoved down their throat. Leave our kids alone. And that means we had to take a stand very clearly about our schools and say, it is wrong to be telling a kid in 2nd grade that they can change genders or that they were born in the wrong body. And when we stood up for that, media didn't like it, the left didn't like it, and we even had the most powerful corporation in Florida, modern history, Disney, did not like it. Now, I think a lot of Republicans around the country, and certainly the ones that are running for president against me, they either did take the side of Disney or certainly would have caved to Disney under those circumstances. I will stand up for our kids. I don't care what the opposition is. This is about the well-being of our children. If we can't fight for that, then what good are we? So we fought Disney, and we won the fight. And we got the gender ideology out of our schools for good. We also leaned in with our universities. We're the first state in America to eliminate so-called DEI from our public universities. You know, they say that it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it's really just an ideological agenda. DEI, as it's practiced, better stands for discrimination, exclusion, and indoctrination, and that has no place in our public universities. So we fought the fight on that, and we fought for people. And here's why it's important, because the left is never going to be satisfied until they control every institution in this society. So if you have these Republicans that say, you know, we should just cut taxes and not worry about the schools or what's going on in corporate America or all that other stuff, I can tell you all those institutions are concerned about imposing their agenda on you. You better be concerned about it. So no state has done more to beat the left at the institutional level than we have in the state of Florida. We have beat them in the schools. We're beating them in the universities. We have beat them in things like corporate activism in corporate America. And people know when their freedoms are threatened by the left, when the left is attempting to impose its pathologies on them, that the state of Florida will stand up and we will fight back on their behalf. And that's exactly what we've done. So it's important to fight. And if you don't have the stomach for these fights, then you should probably find another line of work. But it's just as important that we win these fights. You can sit there and talk about big game, you can have rhetoric, you can do this, make promises, but if you're not ultimately winning elections and ultimately winning the big policy fights, then it's not going to matter. And in Florida, of course, we win the elections very big now. We've set the standard, very important. Because if you don't win, you don't get to do anything. But if you look at the policy wins, I can stand here and thanks to our legislative leaders, people like Speaker Renner and Senator Pasadomo and so many others who've done so well, every single thing that we ran on in 2022, every single thing, 100% we've delivered on already. Not even basically a year after the election. If you think about it, just in the last 4 or 5 years, we've enacted universal school choice in this state. We enacted a parental bill of rights in Florida. We protected women's sports, like the First Lady mentioned, so that they don't jam men in women's athletics. We prohibited sex change operations on minors and puberty blockers on minors. That is not permitted in Florida. We banned sanctuary cities in Florida, we enacted E-Verify, and we executed a transport program that did, among other things, transport illegal aliens to beautiful Martha's Vineyard. And I can tell you, people started talking about the border after that happened. We expanded Second Amendment rights by enacting constitutional carry. We cut taxes by record numbers. We've run budget surpluses and actually paid down almost 25% of our state's total outstanding debt. We inherited the most liberal state Supreme Court in the country. We've now made 6 appointments, and we now have the most conservative Supreme Court in the country. We prohibited the purchase of land by the Chinese Communist Party and its affiliates in our state. We signed the Heartbeat Protection Act. We kneecapped so-called ESG, environment, social governance, not allowed in our pension. We took $2 billion away from BlackRock, who was managing it in the pension. We banned social credit scores in the state of Florida. And we have banned the use of central bank digital currency, one of the first states to do that. When we had the BLM riots of the summer of 2020, we called out the National Guard, and we then enacted anti-riot legislation prohibiting local governments from defunding the police and making sure that people who riot and loot, engage in mob violence, end up in the slammer where they belong. We even enacted the death penalty for pedophiles, and that's what should happen. And we've done so much more, but what are the results of that, of actually winning all those fights? The results are as follows. Florida's economy is ranked #1 in the nation by CNBC. #1 again in 2022 for net in-migration. And I'm not asking people to come to this state. I mean, honestly, the more people come, we got to build more schools and roads and do all this stuff. So it's not like we're begging people to come. They're coming because they see this place as a refuge of freedom and sanity. And the numbers and people voting with their feet speak for itself. We're #1 for fastest growing state, #1 in education by U.S. News and World Report, #1 for parental involvement in education, #1 in new business formations, #1 in both economic and education freedom, and our crime rate is now at a 50-year low, in part because when we had 2 prosecutors, one in Tampa and one in Orlando, that were supported by people like George Soros and were not willing to enforce the law as written, I removed both of them from their posts. They are gone. So you got to win, and we have won in Florida, and we've shown how Republicans can win. But finally, you have to lead. And you have to lead by articulating a vision for freedom that can galvanize support, but also withstand a lot of opposition. Because when you stand for something, when you lead, when you get in front of issues right now, you are going to face attacks. You are going to face a lot of criticism. But you got to be willing to stand your ground. You got to be willing to stand firm for what's right. And we have no other choice but to do this right now as Americans, because as we stand here today, and as proud as we all are of Florida's successes, as a country, we're in danger of being the first generation of Americans to turn over to our kids and grandkids an America less prosperous and less free than the one we inherited. I'm not going to sit idly by and witness the continued decline of this country. The decline is not inevitable. The decline is a choice. We're not going to be satisfied with merely managing the decline a little bit better than the Democrats. No, our mission is very simple. We must reverse the decline of this country. We must usher in an American revival, and we must give this country a new birth of freedom, just like we have in the free state of Florida. And leadership is really the indispensable ingredient. Now is not the time for distractions. You got to be focused. You got to be disciplined. You cannot make excuses. We have to get the job done. And we know there are a lot of things that need to be done. We need to restore the American dream in this country. People that are working hard all across this country, trying to raise their family, are falling further and further behind because of the inflation and the interest rates that have been afflicted on this country because of the overspending, borrowing, and printing that's been done in Washington, D.C. since March of 2020. And that's got fingerprints of both parties on that. We're going to reverse that. We're not going to let Congress spend this country into oblivion. We're going to take Bidenomics, the rules, the regulations, the executive orders, rip them out and throw them in the trash can on day one. We are going to lower your gas prices by opening up all American energy resources for production. We'll be energy dominant, energy independent, and our nation will be more secure. We will also finally restore the sovereignty of our country. We will ensure that our border is no longer being controlled by Mexican drug cartels and being overrun by illegal aliens and having fentanyl pouring in and killing our country. We'll put troops on the southern border. We'll stop the invasion cold. And when people come illegally, you don't just sit there and throw up your hands. You send them back to their home country where they came from. We will build a border wall, and we are going to have countries like Mexico pay for it, not because they're just going to fork over money, of course not. We're going to impose fees on the remittances that foreign workers send to countries like Mexico and Central America and South America. It'll raise billions of dollars, and it will go to construct the border wall. But perhaps most importantly, we are going to hold the Mexican drug cartels accountable for what they are doing to our society. We're going to authorize the use of deadly military force because they are killing people all across this country by the tens of thousands. And it is wrong. And the people in D.C. don't give a damn about it. But I care. I'm standing up. We're going to end the problem of the drug cartels once and for all. As the only veteran running for president, let me tell you, it's important that we revitalize our nation's military. On day one as commander-in-chief, I will take out all the woke, all the social engineering, and throw it away. And we're going to focus on mission first again. We're going to make sure that we succeed in fending off the threat posed to this country by the Chinese Communist Party. We're going to bolster our defenses. We're going to make sure to disentangle our own economy from China, which they've made a fortune off of us. And we're going to make sure China is not allowed to exert influence here in the United States. The things we've done in Florida, not letting them purchase land, kicking them out of the universities. We need to do that all across America. I don't want them purchasing farmland in Iowa. I don't want them purchasing land near military bases in South Carolina. We will have a policy that's very simple with respect to the CCP. We win and they lose. We're going to have a country where the school systems in our country are dedicated solely to educating kids, not to indoctrinating kids. We're going to uphold the rights of parents. We're going to make sure things like CRT aren't in school, but we are going to make sure that our kids, like we have in Florida, are learning American civics again, learning about our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and our founding fathers. We're going to also make sure that whether you live in a red state or a blue city, that criminals are held responsible for their crimes again. We're not going to let the inmates run the asylum. We're not going to let rogue prosecutors get away with not enforcing the law. We are going to make sure that every American family has a right to raise their kids in peace and security. We will restore the rule of law from sea to shining sea throughout this blessed land. We also need to restore the U.S. Constitution to its rightful role in our society. And that means having a limited government that works alongside us, not an unlimited bureaucracy that's been weaponized against us. We cannot allow the administrative state to impose its will on us without our consent any longer. We are going to end the weaponization of agencies like the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the IRS. We're going to eliminate failed agencies like the Department of Education. And we are going to hold bureaucrats accountable for their poor performance. And there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be told something very simple that a lot of presidents have not been willing to do, but we need to now, is simply, you are fired. And there's a lot more that we need to do. But if we're able to do all that, then we will be able to say that we have restored America to what President Reagan called a shining city on a hill. We will have left her stronger and more prosperous to the next generation. We will have answered the call when freedom has been under attack. And make no mistake about it, President Reagan pointed this out. Our founding fathers understood it. President Reagan said freedom's only one generation away from extinction. It's not passed along in the bloodstream. It's something you have to fight for. It's something you have to cultivate. Every generation of Americans, when freedom has been under attack, has answered the call. And our founding fathers knew that this would be important. When they went to Philadelphia to craft our Constitution, they had studied the history of every republic and the history of mankind because they wanted to draw lessons about what happened with those experiments. And there was one thing that united the history of every republic that had ever existed in the history of mankind, and it was this. Every one of them had failed. So our founders understood that it fell to the United States of America to determine once and for all, can people really govern themselves? Can we have a society based on the idea that our rights come from God, not from our government? That society should be governed by the rule of law, not the rule of individual men? Or was mankind forever destined to live under various forms of despotism? And they fully believed that this country would answer that question for all of humanity. When Benjamin Franklin walked out of that Constitutional Convention, he was asked, did you give us a republic or a monarchy? He said, a republic if you can keep it. You can have the best Constitution in the world. You can have the best Declaration of Independence in the world. These things don't run on autopilot. They require every generation of Americans to step up and be counted, sometimes putting on a uniform, risking your life, and indeed giving the last full measure of devotion for service to this country. Now, we're not called upon to make sacrifices at that level, but what we're all called upon to do is do justice to the sacrifices of people that have come before us, to make sure that their deaths were not in vain, to make sure we answered the call, to preserve what George Washington called the sacred fire of liberty. This is a fire that burned in Independence Hall in 1776 when 56 men pledged their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor so that they could found a new nation conceived in liberty. It's the fire that burned at a cemetery in Gettysburg when our nation's first Republican president pledged this nation to a new birth of freedom. It's a fire that burned when the boys who stormed the beaches of Normandy help end Nazism and help save freedom throughout the world. It is a fire that burned at the foot of the Berlin Wall when a resolute president stood in front of the Brandenburg Gate and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And down that wall came. It is our responsibility to carry this torch. It's not a responsibility that we should run from. It's a responsibility that we should welcome, that we have an opportunity to make a difference. So there's going to be a lot that happens in this country over the next weeks and months, but I'll tell you this, I will get the job done as your nominee. We will not only win the presidency, we'll win the Congress, we'll win the Senate, we'll win state legislatures and school boards, just like we did in the state of Florida. As a leader, I'll always conduct myself in a way that you can be proud of, and as your president, I promise you this, I will not let you down. God bless you all. Thank you. Keep up the great work. Florida's the model. We know how to get it done. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Down in sweet Florida.